Welcome in to another excursion around the ether. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. Here are the stories for release around the earth as we come to air with edition number 1219 of This Week in Amateur Radio. The FCC's Legacy Commission Registration System, known as CORS, is scheduled for retirement, allowing for a new system. We will have all the details you need to know. The Hawaii Hurricane Emergency Communications Drill is set to take place on July 16, 2022. A new general chairman is appointed to head the 2023 Dayton Hamvention. A new FCC order will help keep Americans connected when disaster strikes. We will tell you what they have planned. The FCC is seeking input on the current status of the Next Gen Television or ATSC 3.0 transition. The ARRL and TAPR Digital Communications Conference will return in September of 2022, this year in person. We will have all the details. The International Telecommunications Union meets to prepare for the upcoming World Radio Conference 2023. QSO Today's virtual ham exposition is coming up in September and has issued a call for speakers and presentations. We will have the details on that. The Advanced Class Preservation Society, I didn't know there was one, is planning to return its net to the low bands. And how would you like this? Researchers have developed a portable transceiver that doesn't need batteries or solar panels. Interested? We will tell you all about it in this week's report. These headline stories will come to you in a moment, along with this week's special features. We'll visit with Bruce Page, KK5DO, and get an update from AMSAT and what's new with all of those amateur satellites in orbit. Our technology reporter, Leo Laporte, W6TWT, will take a quick look at the history behind cell phone technology, and we'll talk about cellular privacy. Australia's own Onno Benshoff, VK6FLAB, looks into defining a standard on contest scoring. Our own amateur radio historian Bill Continelli, W2XOI, returns with another edition of his summer series entitled Amateur Radio History Headlines. And this week, Bill will take us back to the mid-1930s. Our tower climbing and antenna master, Greg Stoddard, KF9MP, will talk about tower navigation, proper belting, and the sudden stop. And, courtesy of Eric Guth, 4Z1UG, and our colleagues at QSO Today, we will have an extended interview with Paul Andrews, W2HRO, who re-entered amateur radio after a 35-year break by working FM satellites with a Yaesu portable and a dual-band antenna. Experimentation with a simple moon bounce array led him to bigger and better antenna arrays, power amplifiers, low-noise preamps, and higher frequencies, dish antennas, and a lot more QSOs. That's all straight ahead as North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service, This Week in Amateur Radio, takes to the air right now. Reporting from our headquarters studio here in blue sky, sunny Albany, New York, and I'm stuck in the studio, I'm George, W2XBS.
And reporting from the newsroom in Half Moon, New York, I'm Terry Saunders, N1KIN.
And reporting from our news bureau in Rochester, New York, along the southern shore of Lake Ontario, I'm Dave Wilson, WA2HOY.
And reporting from our news bureau just outside Albany, New York, in the Geek Cave studios, I'm Rich Lawrence, KB2MOB.
And reporting from our ham radio station outpost in the western Catskill Mountains of upstate New York, where the corn is waist high, but it's not as high as an elephant's eye, I'm Don Hulick, K2ATJ.
And reporting from our Troy, New York News Bureau, where it's not quite hot enough to fry an egg on the sidewalk, I'm Eric, KD2RJX.
And reporting from our news bureau in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where we officially hit triple-digit temperatures this week. Guess it's officially hot. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR, grateful for the invention of air conditioning.
And now with this week's lead story, here is Terry Saunders, N1KIN.
Leading off our news this week, the Federal Communications Commission will retire the legacy version of its Commission Registration System, commonly referred to as CORS, on July 15, 2022. John Ross, KD8IDJ, is standing by at League headquarters with his special report.
CORS is the FCC's public-facing database that enables and tracks certain types of FCC applicant actions, including amateur radio applications and licenses. Its implementation has enabled routine amateur applications and licenses to be issued overnight instead of over weeks, as was the case with all of the earlier methods. ARRL is advising that the amateur radio community transition to the updated version of CORS just as soon as possible. In effect, the new CORS system can be thought of as an electronic interactive file folder. The updated version of CORS has been available since 2016, and now its use will be mandatory for all amateur licensees when submitting amateur-related applications. So starting July 15, 2022, the Legacy CORS website will redirect users to the Commission's updated CORS site. Although some functionalities in the old system will continue to work for a short time, the FCC has urged all users to transition to the updated CORS system to take advantage of its enhanced security and functionality. You have to register with the FCC. If you do not have an FCC CORS user account, you'll need to create one with a unique username, a valid email address, and password. Then after creating the account, you'll be logged in, and you should associate your existing FRN or FRNs, if you have more than one, with that new account. Instructions for doing so are on the FCC registration help page. Your FRN is printed on all current applications and licenses, and that will not change. FRNs can also be found by looking up your call sign in the Commission's ULS, that's the Universal Licensing System, or you can use the FCC's Advanced Search page. The FCC CORS registration instructions can also be found on the ARRL website.
In essence, CORS is designed to identify those who hold certain types of FCC licenses and FCC authorizations, including amateur licenses, and organize them in an easily accessible manner under a common FCC registration number, or FRN, regardless of whether one holds a single such authority or thousands. The new CORS, in addition to assigning individual FRNs, allows holders of multiple FRNs to aggregate them under a single account where the licenses and authorization, fees and payments, and related actions can be administered from within the same account. The FCC has posted tutorial videos to assist with the transition. ARRL Volunteer Examiner Coordinator Manager Maria Soma, AB1FM, recommends viewing the videos Getting Started with the New CORS, which explains how to register for a CORS username account, and Associating an FRN to a username, which instructs legacy CORS users on how to link one or more existing FRNs to a username. FCC CORS registration instructions can also be found on the ARRL website. Additional information is available on the FCC website or by calling the FCC Licensing Support Center at 877-480-3201, option 4, and on the FCC's e-support page.
Makani Ino is Hawaiian for Big Wind, and the name of Hawaii's amateur radio emergency service upcoming hurricane emergency communications drill. The drill will assess the ability of amateur radio operators to establish emergency radio communications in the event of a severe infrastructure failure due to hurricane-like conditions. In addition to testing two-way radio communications, the drill will also use WinLink Global Radio Email to send and receive messages from surrounding islands and participating agencies. Radio operators will first use radio, then they'll send simulated digital messages using WinLink for reports and requests for assistance. Hawaii ARRL's Public Information Officer Michael Miller, KH6ML, said, "With this drill, we are also trying to increase the level of participation so that all operators have the chance to develop the skill sets for real-world situations." Miller added, "It is important for younger or new amateur radio operators to know they can use their digital skills in emergency situations." Miller appeared on a recent KITV newscast in Hawaii to share the details and ask for all licensed amateurs to get involved. Hams who participate in Skywarn, CERT, and other emergency response programs are welcome, as are those who may not be involved in races, ARRLs, or any club. In this statewide exercise, the hams will follow the standardized incident command system that is in use throughout the United States. The exercise presumes that each of the Hawaiian islands has lost internet, cell phone service, and electrical power as a result of a hurricane. Miller also said they will be sending after-action reports to participating agencies, such as the National Weather Service and the American Red Cross, to help improve communications using amateur radio technology. This is the second statewide drill conducted by Hawaii ARRLs in 2022. Makani Ino begins Saturday, July 16, 2022, from 9 a.m. to noon Hawaii Standard Time. For details on how to get involved, visit the website hawaiiarrls.net.
With the recently concluded Dayton Hamvention 2022 now just a memory, planning is already underway for next year. Congratulations go to Jim Storms, AB8YK, on being named General Chairman of Hamvention for 2023. The Dayton Amateur Radio Association announced Jim's new responsibility on Friday, July 1st. Jim has served as Vice President of the Dayton Amateur Radio Association for 3 years and has been an officer for several other local amateur radio clubs. He is also a co-leader for the Dave Coulter Youth DX Adventure Program, which he helped found. Jim has been Hamvention's chairman of advanced registration since 2017. The Dayton Amateur Radio Association Board also announced that Brian Markland, NAUDQ, will serve as Hamvention's Assistant General Chairman.
This week, the Federal Communications Commission released an order to protect the public from wireless outages following natural disasters. The order makes the current voluntary industry framework under which wireless carriers support each other following natural disasters mandatory. The order also makes important changes to improve the framework. Under the new framework, wireless carriers must have roaming agreements in place so that any carrier with a network outage caused by a natural disaster can get voice roaming on any carrier that's still operational and render whatever mutual aid to each other they can reasonably provide during the emergency. The order also establishes new triggers for when these obligations go into place so that obligations for cooperation go into effect as soon as the disaster strikes.
The Federal Communications Commission has released a third further notice of proposed rulemaking regarding the transition to the Next Generation Television ATSC 3.0 standard. The FCC is seeking comments on the progress of television broadcasters' voluntary market-driven deployment of ATSC 3.0 service, the current state of the ATSC marketplace, and whether two ATSC 3.0 requirements scheduled to sunset on June 17, 2023 should be extended. Comments will be due 30 days after the NPRM is published in the Federal Register. NextGen TV, or ATSC 3.0, is the newest broadcast TV transmission standard developed by the Advanced Television Systems Committee. NextGen TV will allow delivery of traditional over-the-air broadcasting content via Internet Protocol using the same 6 MHz channels currently allocated for DTV service. The transition to the new standard will enable broadcasters to deliver an array of new video and non-video services and enhanced content features to consumers. Television broadcasters in at least 68 markets have voluntarily converted to the new service. The FCC is specifically seeking comments on 3 items. First, the FCC seeks information about the state of the ATSC 3.0 marketplace, including information and data on broadcasters' current deployment of ATSC 3.0 service, the availability and pricing of ATSC 3.0 consumer television equipment, the number of over-the-air television viewers currently watching ATSC 3.0 broadcasts, whether any multi-channel video programming distributors are currently carrying or are planning to carry ATSC 3.0 signals, and how the marketplace is handling patent royalties for essential patents in ATSC 3.0 technology. Second, the Commission seeks comments on whether to retain or sunset the substantially similar requirement. Because television sets capable of receiving 3.0 signals are not widely available, to ensure that viewers are able to continue to receive stations programming, the FCC requires all stations that convert to 3.0 to simulcast their primary stream in 1.0. As part of this mandate, the FCC requires all programming simulcast on a NextGen TV station's ATSC 1.0 channel to be substantially similar, which effectively means that the 1.0 and 3.0 signals must contain all of the same programming except any enhancements only available in 3.0. The NPRM explains that the requirement that broadcasters simulcast in both ATSC 1.0 and 3.0 will remain in effect, but the substantially similar requirement is scheduled to sunset in June 2023. It seeks comments on whether, based on the state of the ATSC 3.0 conversion and the consumer equipment market, this requirement should be extended. Finally, the FCC asks for the input on whether to retain or sunset the requirement that next-gen TV broadcasters' primary video programming stream comply with the ATSC A/322 standard. The ATSC A/322 standard is a technical standard for the formatting of a television station's broadcast signal intended to provide certainty to consumers, television receiver manufacturers, that ATSC 3.0 TV sets and equipment will be able to receive all ATSC 3.0 primary broadcast signals.
The 41st ARRL and TAPR Digital Communications Conference will be held this September 16th through the 18th, 2022 in Charlotte, North Carolina. With more details on the upcoming Digital Communications Conference, we go to John Ross, KD8IDJ, who files this report from League headquarters.
Last year's conference was held virtually due to COVID-19 concerns, but this year's three-day event will be held at the Hilton Charlotte Airport Hotel. The DCC is for everyone, beginners and experts alike, with an interest in all forms of digital communications. The official call for technical papers has been issued, and general topic areas include, but are not limited to, software-defined radio, that's SDR, digital voice, digital satellite communications, digital signal processing, HF digital modes, adapting IEEE 802.11 systems for amateur radio, global positioning systems, GPS, automatic positioning reporting system, that's APRS, Linux and amateur radio, AX.25 updates, internet operability with amateur radio networks, TCP/IP networking over amateur radio, mesh and peer-to-peer wireless networking, and emergency and homeland defense digital communications and amateur radio.
Authors can submit their papers for this year's conference by email to ARRL Production Coordinator Maddie Weinberg, KB1EIB@mweinberg@ARRL.org. That's MWEINBERG@ARRL.org. The deadline is September 1st, 2022. The conference papers will be published exactly as submitted. The authors will retain all rights and do not need to be present at the conference. And all papers will be distributed to conference attendees. Printed copies will be available for sale at Lulu at www.lulu.com. That's www.lulu.com. More information about TAPR, Tomorrow's Ham Radio Technology Today, can be found at their website.
The ARRL Foundation Board of Directors has approved the recipients of the 2022 ARRL Foundation Scholarships as recommended by the Scholarship Committee. Foundation scholarships totaling $921,250 will be awarded to 139 deserving radio amateurs pursuing higher education. Individual scholarship awards range from $500 to $25,000. Applications for 2023 ARRL Foundation scholarships are expected to open on October 1st, 2022. More information about the ARRL Foundation Scholarship Program is available at www.arrl.org/scholarship-program. The ARRL Foundation administers programs to support the amateur radio community and was established in 1973 by ARRL, the National Association for Amateur Radio. The full list of scholarship awards and recipients can be found on the ARRL website.
The ARRL DX Advisory Committee recently appointed John Sweeney, K9EL, as the new Central Division representative. Sweeney replaces Jim O'Connell, W9WU, who served for over 20 years on the committee. The committee also appointed Central Division Director Karl Lutzelschwab, K9LA, to board liaison, who replaces Delta Division Director David Norris, K5UZ. The ARRL DX Advisory Committee addresses and advises the ARRL Board on issues concerning the DXCC program amateur radio's premier award that hams can earn by confirming on-the-air contacts with a minimum of 100 countries. The DXAC is composed of representatives from each ARRL division, a representative from Radio Amateurs of Canada, an ARRL board liaison, a staff liaison, and an administrative liaison. To learn more about the DX Advisory Committee and representatives in each division, visit the ARRL website and search for DX Advisory Committee.
Do you have a ham radio project, experience, technology, invention, or story that you'd like to share? Well, the QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo will return on the weekend of September 17th and 18th, and the best way and most open place to become an amateur radio mentor. The key to the Expo's reach and influence is the wide variety and scope of presentations and speakers that come with the Expo. The thousands of messages that the Expo has received since starting up in August of 2020, your presentations make a difference in the lives of amateurs that attend and view them. Your presentations open the minds of amateurs to the possibilities of our amazing hobby, which offers everything to everyone, young and old. Unlike other conventions, meetings, and ham fests, the QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo has the ability to offer more opportunities for amateurs to make presentations that will be seen and shared by thousands of hams. This time we're very interested in presentations by young people who are active in amateur radio. For more information about being a speaker, making a presentation, and to apply, please visit www.qsotodayhamexpo.com/speakercall.html.
The A13 net is back on the air, and it's going back, way back to its roots. The net, which is being organized by the Advanced Class Preservation Society, returns to 20 meters on Monday, July 11th. Instead of being a formal net, it's going back to being the general roundtable it had been at the very start. Be listening for Scott, W5URX, to kick things off at 1700 UTC on 14.213 MHz. Participants are holders of an advanced class license issued by the United States FCC. The agency stopped issuing these licenses in the year 2000, but they are renewable. Editor Paul Boucher, N8HHG, writes about the revival of the net in the most recent A13 newsletter, saying, "We will give this a try and see how it works out. Please consider joining in the net and listen for future net days and times." According to the newsletter, the Preservation Society has 315 members in 50 states and 2 United States territories.
Rama Mohan Rao, VU2, RM, was a radio pioneer in India celebrated for the many firsts throughout his long life. According to an announcement by the Institute of Amateur Radio and Kerala, the retired communications engineer became a silent key on June 29th, following cardiac arrest while hospitalized with a lung infection. The Institute recalled that Rama Mohan Rao was one of a handful of amateurs to hold a license in India's earliest days of amateur radio. Although he was known for a wide array of homebrew equipment, including many used in satellite communications, hams remember him best as the first Indian amateur to build a single sideband transceiver that put affordable equipment in the hands of those unable to pay for more expensive rigs. The transceiver, RM96, was built using locally available components. Homebrew was his calling, and according to his QRZ page, he was one of the first hams to work the Oscar satellites using all homebrew equipment. A fan of 6-meter operation, he was the first Indian amateur to operate on the band in 1959. He had also been an adventurous de-expeditioner, and his travels took him to the Andaman Islands in 1960 as part of the first de-expedition there, where the team used all homebrew equipment and antennas. The Institute in Kerala recalled the nickname given him, the Indian Marconi. Rama Mohan Rao was 91. Meanwhile, and staying in India, Gurudetta Panda, VU3 GDP, an engineer who helped launch India into a prominent status in space communications, has become a silent key. According to various reports on the internet, Gurudetta was killed in a traffic accident on June 26th. The young engineer was best known for constructing small satellites, many of which were deployed to assist with communications during natural disasters. Most notable was the ExceedSat CubeSat, created with an 8-member development team that included co-founder Ashan Farhan, VU2 ESE in Hyderabad, India. The 10-centimeter satellite had an APRS digipeater and an amateur radio FM transponder and was India's first private satellite launched in December 2018 by the US-based SpaceX company. AMSAT designated it VO96. Guru Datta also advocated young people's involvement in amateur radio. Active in disaster communications and disaster drills, Guru Datta assisted with many major operations including the 2013 cyclone and the Ghanem district in India.
2022 ARRL Field Day lit up the bands from coast to coast, and ARRL headquarters has already received over 2,400 entries submitted via the online Field Day entry web application. Scores are pouring into the ARRL, and with more details on what has been received so far, we go to John Ross, KB8IDJ, who files this report from League headquarters.
Early analysis reveals that most of the interest participated as Class D, that's home stations, and Class E, home stations using emergency power. As of June 30th, the breakdown of field day entries by class showed 2,723 total entries, with 272 in Class A, 361 in Class B, 32 in Class C, that's mobile, 1,524 in Class D, 484 in Class E, and 50 in Class F. So far, a total of over 517,000 contacts have been reported for the event. Those numbers are changing daily. In 2021, there were 1.5 million contacts made during the field day activities. Many participants were keeping their hopes up for better propagation as early forecasts were looking promising. ARRL contest manager Paul Bork and one SFE said that propagation aside, there was substantial activity. While band activity and conditions might not have been the greatest, there was a good amount of activity on all of the bands. Many participants seem to agree that the recent rule changes, capping transmitter power output to 100 watts, was a good idea. There is still plenty of time to submit your 2022 Field Day entry. Participants who submit their entries using ARRL's online submission form can earn 50 bonus points and will receive an email confirmation of their completed entry. Be sure to check the Entries Received webpage to verify your entry status, and be careful of this. If it indicates pending documents, the required dupe sheet, or in lieu of that, a Cabrillo log file or other supporting documentation of the claimed bonus point is missing, so check that carefully. Participants can edit or add documentation to their online submissions by using the link provided in the confirmation email. And field day entries, by the way, must be submitted online or postmarked no later than 2059 Universal Coordinated Time on July 26, 2022.
Christy Maluzzi has made a commemorative field day cake for each of the last 3 years featuring the event's logo. She recently married Andy Maluzzi, KK4LWR of Claremont, Florida. Andy is a member of the ARRL Public Relations Committee and co-advisor to the ARRL Collegiate Amateur Radio Program. Dustin Lomax, KF7FK, reported in his soapbox comments that it was his first field day in which he used CW, adding that CW was a fun change of pace that really helped make the most of marginal band conditions in Western Washington. 2022 Field Day was highly promoted thanks to the efforts of many ARRL division and section volunteers, amateur radio clubs, and their members. Many states and counties obtained special proclamations from local governments designating the weekend, in some cases the whole week, as Field Day and Amateur Radio Week, recognizing the many contributions of amateur radio operators during emergencies and with serving their communities. ARRL treated participants with a live video stream from W1AW, its headquarters station, throughout Field Day. Life member Carl Schwab, KO8S of Warren, Michigan, was delighted with making contact with W1AW during Field Day. I heard W1AW calling CQ Field Day on 20-meter single sideband, wrote Schwab. I responded and then heard Kilo Oscar 8 Sierra, your 5 Foxtrot, Connecticut. I responded with my report and got in their log. After Field Day and uploading my log, I went to the ARRL website, and there I found a 4-hour video was available on YouTube showing W1AW during their Field Day activities. While watching this video, at hour 2, minute 55, I heard and saw my live contact with them. This was a special moment for me, one I will never forget. A recording of the W1AW livestream is available on the ARRL's YouTube channel.
And now with the latest technology news and commentary from Petaluma, California. This Week in Amateur Radio is proud to present Leo Laporte.
Welcome. Good to see you. Boy, there's a lot of stuff in tech these days. When I first started doing this show, Not when I started as the tech guy. That was 2004. That was the modern times. When I started doing programming in the early 90s, it was simple. Those are easy times. We barely talked about the internet. And when we did, it was this university Defense Department network of computers that you'll never have access to. It was Windows 3.1. It was a simpler time. Linux wasn't even invented. It was invented in 1992. That's actually maybe right about when I started doing this. We've come a long way, baby. Now it's pretty much everything in the world, isn't it? It's all tech, anything with a chip in it. It used to be, you needed a toll-free number because it was so expensive to call long distance. Not anymore. Doesn't cost you anything on your cell phone usually, right? You're already paying for unlimited long-distance calls. Unlimited. And calling internationally, a few pennies a minute? Wow. That I think you can trace to antitrust laws and the breakup of Ma Bell. I think that's pretty clearly the biggest success story of antitrust legislation. That may be in breaking up Standard Oil. I don't know. I don't go that far back. But when Ma Bell was broken up, long-distance prices over the next few years tumbled because companies like MCI could come along. Do you remember that? In the early days, MCI, who was forbidden from using the lines owned by Ma Bell for the longest time, once Ma Bell was broken up, MCI could then offer long-distance service. Do you remember that? You'd get a PIN, a number that you would dial first. So you'd pick up the phone, you'd dial this long number, your MCI number, and then you could make long-distance calls for cheap. For the time, cheap. I always wonder what those early MCI toll charges were. They weren't what we have now, but that was the breakthrough. And then competition, right? And competition. Of course, the phone companies have re-merged. In fact, MCI was bought by Verizon. WorldCom, another one offering cheap long distance. You'd have a WorldCom card, right? Bought by Verizon. It's kind of, Ma Bell's almost reassembled itself. AT&T is the Death Star, the behemoth. Then there's T-Mobile, the young upstart, plucky young upstart, who's now as big as the other two. So but hey, we have competition. Competition leads to lower prices. And the thing that Ma Bell argued for years, oh man, don't want us to break up because we are preserving the sanctity, the strength, the power, the reliability of the nationwide network. If you broke us up, people would be putting using their own phones. Yeah, only us old timers remember this. You couldn't buy your own phone. You had to rent a phone from a company called Western Electric, a subsidiary of Ma Bell. You rented the phone. There was no innovation because there wasn't any need for it. There was no competition. And you couldn't put your own line. That was another thing that changed with, again, good antitrust regulations, the very famous Carter Phone decision. Supreme Court ended up making that difference, allowing you to connect a device other than a Western Electric rented handset to the telephone network. 54 years ago, the FCC, Carter Phone. In 1968, before Carter Phone, AT&T owned it all. They made the phones. They rented you the phones. You could not connect anything to, like a modem. Couldn't connect it unless it was from Western Electric, and they didn't make modems. So you wouldn't have been able to connect your computer equipment without AT&T's permission. Boy, that was an important decision. It was a huge decision. A very famous case. So good. Now we have competition. In some areas, I guess there are, now, what happens with monopolies is they reform, and you have to kind of constantly keep on them. So now we have this whole issue with Google being so powerful, and, and it's kind of the same situation. Your phone now has everything on it. It's more than your phone. It's a computer. It's the computer for many people in their pocket that has everything in it. And that's why nowadays, when they're investigating criminality, what do? They seize your phone. Interesting case here. The Justice Department this week seized iPhones from 2 attorneys involved in the January 6th probe. Campaign advisor for Donald Trump, John Eastman, who was the guy who kind of set up the coup. He figured it all out in a legal filing. June 22nd, federal agents stopped him as he was leaving a restaurant and took his iPhone 12 Pro. Now, you'd think, boy, I mean, that was a long time ago. You'd think Eastman would have erased any trace if there were illegality, if he did anything wrong. He certainly, would he be carrying around his phone? Well, the judge who signed the warrant must have thought so. Oh, here's an interesting thing. Eastman says they took the phone and then showed me the warrant. I believe that because they don't want you to mess with the phone if they know, if a bad guy has a phone in his hands and you say, here's a warrant for your phone, bad guy's going to make that phone a little harder to get into. Eastman says, quote, he was, and this is a little line in the whole story, but one I noticed, he was forced to provide biometric data. That's interesting. So they took the phone. Here's the warrant. Now I want you to unlock that phone with your face. Once unlocked, of course, federal agents almost certainly connected it immediately to a device that sucked all the data out of it. That's what they do. Made by a company called Celebrite. You plug it into the lightning port, all the data is now on a drive inside that box. The phone, you can lock it again, doesn't matter, I got everything. But this is an important point. He was forced to provide biometric data. And there's a debate in the courts over this, and different courts have ruled differently, but it has generally been held that you are protected from self-incrimination, right? We all agree. We know that. You are protected by the Constitution and the Fourth Amendment against self-incrimination and unlawful search and seizure. And the courts pretty much agree on that, What they don't agree on is what is self-incrimination. Some courts have ruled, and most courts seem to agree, that asking for a password is in effect, especially for a phone where you presume there's a lot of good, juicy stuff on there, asking for the password for that phone would be tantamount to saying, incriminate yourself. So many courts have said police cannot ask for the password. They can take the phone, but they can't ask for the password. That's why you remember the FBI went after Apple saying, help us unlock this phone. It was locked, and they couldn't compel the defendant to give them the password. Well, the defendant was dead in this case, but point remains, and it's happened in many cases. However, biometric information, that's interesting. Some courts have held that's different. You're not self-incriminating if the police hold the phone up to your face and it unlocks, or are you? Isn't that pretty much the same as entering a PIN? Well, courts have said no. Again, there's not universal agreement, and I think this needs to be clarified. But in general, in case you're ever held up by federal agents and they demand your phone, you might want to know this, and this is why they took his phone before they gave him the warrant. When you have an iPhone with Face ID or Touch ID, if you press and hold the screen on and off switch for 2 seconds, you can lock it. And once locked, it needs your password, your PIN, to unlock it. Face ID no longer works. Law enforcement, Department of Justice knew that, obviously, because they said, give me the phone, and then they said, here's a search warrant. And then they said, look into the phone, and unlocked it. According to most recent court decisions, that was what they needed to do to get into that phone. And it apparently it's not considered by many courts. We'll see. I suspect this will become a case. John Eastman did not self-incriminate by providing the biometric information, whether it's a fingerprint or the face. Would have self-incriminated if they demanded the password. And he didn't have enough time to press that button for 2 seconds to lock it so that they couldn't do it without a password. Wow. That is a minor little footnote in all the stories about this, but that's an important one. And I think the other important one is that these phones are more than just a telephone. This is not your Western Electric phone that you plug into the wall and you make, hello, operator. This is your life in here, right? All your location information, all your texts. I have all my passwords in there. I have my identification documents, my social security number. I mean, everything is in this phone. That's why you want to lock it and keep tight regulation. You know who has access to this phone, though? Every app that you put on it. I just bought a water bottle that a stupid purchase. I don't recommend it, but it's a water bottle that monitors how much you drink, right? So you drink, you're supposed to drink enough water. So you say, I want to drink 64 ounces a day. And the water bottle somehow magically measures that. It's made in China. Nice instructions. Got 30 pages of instructions, one tiny page per language. It's 30 different languages. And the first thing you're supposed to do to use this bottle is hook it up to your phone. Get the app, right? The app says, I want location information. Always. Why do they need location information to know how much water I've drunk? It's a Chinese company, Chinese app, asks for location information. And probably most of us just go, yeah. I want to know how much water I drank. Yeah, fine. This phone uses Bluetooth LE to see the bottle wherever it is, automatically copy the ounces from it. But I have to think there's more going on than just that. The apps on your phone know more than law enforcement does, and this is why Apple, and good for them, has introduced ways to restrict the amount of information an app can ask for, but still, Apple knows all. It's just a fascinating subject. I think we're going to see some more court decisions on this. I have a feeling maybe even the Supreme Court will end up ruling. Anyway, I'm glad you were here, and I'm here, and I'll be here next week, and I hope you'll come by and bring your friends too as we talk high tech. Leo Laporte, the tech guy.
Are you ready for another trip into amateur radio history? I'm Bill Continelli, W2XOY, and I'll be back in a moment with another edition of the Ancient Amateur Archives, here on This Week in Amateur Radio. This is Bill Continelli, W2XOY, with Amateur Radio History Headlines. 1933 and 1934. The Communications Act of 1934 creates the Federal Communications Commission. Amateur licenses are reorganized into Class A, Class B, and Class C. Major Edwin Armstrong develops wideband FM. 1936. H.P. Maxim, the founder of the ARRL and its first president, dies. 1938. The Cairo Conference. Amateurs lose the exclusive use of 40 meters, now shared with the broadcasters. The FCC gives us two new UHF bands, the 2.5 meter band at 112 megacycles and the 1.25 meter band at 224 megacycles. 1939 through 1940. We are joined in the UHF range by two new users. The first FM broadcast band, which ran from 42 to 50 megacycles and featured stations such as W1XPW, W2XMN, and W2XOY, and the first television broadcast band above 60 megacycles with stations such as W2XBS. 1940 through 1941. With the war raging in Europe, our ability to have international QSOs is severely limited. When the U.S. enters the war, all amateur activity is suspended. 1942 through 1945. Except for WERS, the War Emergency Radio Service, on 2.5 meters, no amateur operations take place. New UHF tubes and circuits are developed as a result of the war. This has been Amateur Radio History Headlines with Bill Continelli, W2XOY, for This Week in Amateur Radio.
Foundations of Amateur Radio. Not a weekend goes by without an amateur radio contest or 6, each with its own objectives, audience, times, rules, exchanges and scores. When you get bitten by the contesting bug, you'll quickly graduate from using pen and paper to keyboard and screen. That process comes with the inevitable selection of software suitable to both run on your Wsjt computer and log your particular contest, since, as you'll discover, not all software knows about all contests or runs on every computer. When you eventually do arrive at a working solution, you'll reap the rewards of using technology. Contesting software can help in many different ways, from logging your operating frequency and mode to tracking where other stations are active, and it doesn't stop there. Type in a partial call sign and your software can suggest which ones it might be. Log a contact and you'll see if your contact is valid within the rules or not. Software can track your activity level and warn if you're exceeding any contest time limits. It can keep track of multipliers and the impact on your total score. And at the end of a contest, contesting software can help with submitting your log. After you've done this for a while, you'll notice that contest rules and scoring change over time. That brings with it the possibility of your software using old and invalid rules for validation, scoring, and other contesting requirements. In most cases, software is updated manually by the author to implement the latest rules. This means that authors are required to keep up to date with the rules for all of the contests that their software supports, let alone add new contests. There are a few applications that support the idea of a contest definition, which suggests the ability for anyone to define contesting rules to use them within the application. Unfortunately, their functionality is strictly limited, and they're not sufficient to define every contest rule that is in use today. Sadly, flexible as they might seem, they're neither universal nor compatible with each other. One definition written by one amateur for one application cannot be used anywhere else, never mind trying to determine what the latest version is. I strongly believe that we need a shared open standard that can serve contest organizers, contest software developers, and contest participants. Before I elaborate, I will be explicit in pointing out that the intent is to standardize in a way that makes it possible to document all past, current, and future contests, and, in doing so, provide a collaborative way to share contesting rules between organizers, software developers, and contesters, not to mention award committees and amateur associations. So, if such a contest rules standard were to exist, what would it look like? Until now, the approach has been to create a list of keywords and values that deal with particular types of rules, things like band start and stop, zone score, valid prefixes, power level, exchange, etc. The result is a growing but always incomplete list of keywords with no means to define any logic. At the moment, all the contesting applications manage any scoring logic internally, requiring that it's updated when any of the rules change. Not only that, the contest organizer has no insight into the mechanism and no means to validate the process. As a contest organizer, scoring hundreds, if not thousands of logs is a whole different challenge. Many contests do this manually, rely on someone else's software, or, if the contest is popular enough, write their own code to manage the process. All this effort creates a disconnect between the contester, the organizer, and the contest software developers, each using their own definition of the rules of any particular contest. A different approach might be to implement specific rules in a universal programming language, like say JavaScript, and use those to manage the scoring and validation logic specific to each contest. For example, you might define a function that returns the starting and ending time for a contest, which gives you a mechanism to detect if the contest is happening right now. A contester could use it to determine when the contest starts and ends, but the same definition could be used by the organizer to determine if a submitted log entry is for a valid time. Another might be a function that uses a call sign to determine if it attracts points or not, and if it does, how many. Contesting software might use it to change the color of the screen to indicate an invalid entry, but an organizer might use it to exclude a contact from a log. You could have a function to determine if the exchange is valid, or what the next exchange number is, or if the frequency on which the radio is currently tuned to is allowed for a contest. You could combine some of these simple rules to determine, for example, if the frequency the radio is on is the same or different since the last contact, and if that's permitted or not within the rules. As long as the framework in which this standard is defined is extensible, any contest could be defined in this way. If it's written well, contest organizers might be able to write their own rules using this standard, and everyone can use the same rules for their own needs. You might recall that I've spoken about aspects of this problem before, and at the time I suggested that an amateur radio standards body would be helpful. Failing that, there's nothing stopping a few people collaborating in a discussion about how this might be implemented. As an IT professional outside my shack, I have some ideas on what's needed and what could give the whole amateur community something useful. But, unsurprisingly, I don't know everything. Working together as contesters, we might come up with a better result. As a starting point, I've created a repository on GitHub called Amateur Contesting Standard to start a conversation about this scheme, and I would love to read your thoughts and see your ideas on how this might be achieved. If you'd like to get in touch, send an email to cq@vk6flab.com or find my call sign on Twitter and GitHub. I'm Ono, Victor Kilo 6, Foxtrot Lima, Alpha Bravo.
Hams active in Parks on the Air received upbeat news on the Parks on the Air website recently. It read in part, From 1200 UTC on July 1st, activators have been able to upload their own logs rather than rely on regional volunteer coordinators to do so. Hams logging onto the Parks on the Air site should now see a menu option called Mylog Uploads. The feature became active on July 1st following a period of successful beta testing. Posting on the website QR peer, Thomas Witherspoon, K4SWL, said the option was a welcome change for activators. The system updates comes just in time for the Parks on the Air annual Support Your Parks plaque event on the 16th and 17th of July, where there will be shields to be won for various classes of operation.
Welcome, I'm Eric Guth for Wsjt, your host. After taking a break from ham radio for almost 35 years, Paul Andrews, W2HRO, re-entered the amateur radio by working satellites with a Yaesu portable and a dual-band antenna. As his QRZ page demonstrates, working VHF satellites, then experimenting with simple moon bounce arrays, led to bigger and better antenna arrays, power amplifiers, low-noise preamplifiers, higher frequencies, and more QSOs. Paul's return to amateur radio and his continuous improvement over the last years is a compelling and interesting story that I'm happy to share with you in this episode of QSO Today. W2HRO, this is Eric for Wsjt. Are you there, Paul?
Hi, Eric. Yes, I'm here.
Hey, Paul, thanks for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. Can we start at the beginning of your ham radio story? When and how did it start for you?
I was a energetic 10 or 11-year-old, and I got a CB walkie-talkie for Christmas and would run around the neighborhood with my brothers and sisters and friends with the walkie-talkie. And a couple times, my handheld walkie-talkie was able to reach out to a permanent station, a CB station. Back then in the U.S., there was a class of, this was an amateur, this was for Citizens band, and there were a handful of 5-watt stations with permanent antennas. And I spoke to some of these people and learned that you could get a more powerful CB radio, a 5-watt radio, up from a 100 milliwatt walkie-talkie. And I convinced my father to get me one of these 5-watters that required a license. So he bought the radio, I think from Radio Shack, and did what he was supposed to do, was get an FCC license, and our family was officially licensed for CB. We were doing everything the right way. In the early 70s, the CB radio was kind of the Wild West. The truckers were using it, and it was fun, but it was also crazy. The FCC wanted to try to clean up CB radio at that time because all these people weren't really following the rules.
They were using it like amateur radio, right? They were rag chewing, and they were telling you where the speed guns were.
Exactly. So it was a lot of fun. But one day, a gray sedan pulled up into the front yard with government plates on it. 2 FCC field officers knocked on the door and asked who was the operator of the radio, and my father brought him in, and amazingly, with all the crazy stuff happening on CB radio, my father received 2 citations for my CB radio activity. One was for not identifying my station every 10 minutes. I guess I lapsed the 10-minute requirement. And the second one was for idle chit-chat. At that time, CB radio, you were not allowed to engage in idle chit-chat. You had to have a purpose for your communications, and you had to get off. So the idea of just chatting with your friends was illegal. So they fined my father. He paid the fines, and that was my introduction to the FCC. So anyway, my father then had a friend who was a ham radio guy, Caesar, W2SVV, explained to him what happened, and Caesar said, your son shouldn't be on CB radio, he should be on ham radio. So immediately the CB radio disappeared. I got a code book, a learn to pass your novice test handbook, and within a year or so, my mom had taught me Morse code. I was sitting in front of Caesar. He was giving me the volunteer exam at his desk. I passed my 5 words a minute, and he pushed a microphone in front of me. Well, a microphone under his license as a novice. It was CW only back in 1972. But that's how I got into to ham radio, and it all started there at about 12 years old.
Well, how did your mom know the Morse code?
I was also a Cub Scout on my way to being a Boy Scout. Around that same time, there was a merit badge that if you learned Morse code, you could get a merit badge. So a combination of a merit badge and Morse code. And my mom was probably tired of hearing me tap on my tone oscillator. So she would test me, and it didn't take too long to get to 5 words a minute. And there we go.
What was your first call sign?
Whiskey November 2, Hotel Romeo Oscar, WN2HRO.
Oh, there you go. So there's no relationship to a ham radio outlet then?
No,
okay.
no.
Okay. Too bad. No discounts either, it seems to me.
No discounts. But I did have a very early Elmer who loved that call sign when I got it. One is ham radio operator is a pretty cool phonetic, although I always use Hotel Romeo Oscar. And the other one was the famous national HRO receiver, which I think I need to add that to my collection one day, is just to have the namesake radio.
And what was the first rig?
It was Heath kits that were put together. People here in the East Coast of the U.S., not far away from my home, was Trevose, Pennsylvania, was a store called Hamtronics. And we just went there, and my father took out a crisp $100 bill and bought some equipment for me.
Okay, great. So you have your first license, you have your call sign. When did you upgrade?
Probably within a year or so. I thought I could pass the general and pass the technical portion, but failed the code. So I became a technician and did some 2-meter stuff. I don't know if other hams have done the same thing, but I passed my novice, went for my general, failed the code, and got the technician. Then went for, I don't know if I ever hit general. I think I went right to advanced. I may have tested for extra and got the advanced, but novice, technician.
You would have had to get to 13 words a minute to get the advanced, right? So your code speed did improve.
Oh, yeah. And then ultimately the extra at some point.
Did you belong to an amateur radio club in those days? Was that encouraged?
I wasn't a paying member, but the very old radio club here in New Jersey, Whiskey 2 ZQ, was the local repeater. And when I was 12 or 13 with a 2-meter radio, that was the repeater I was on. So and Caesar W2 SVB was a member of W2 ZQ. So that's my local, and I'm a member now of the local club.
You're still living in the area where you grew up?
Oh yeah, I only live 2 or 3 miles away from the club station.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. Given that Americans tend to be very mobile.
You think that, but I think I read someplace that 90 or 95% of people are born and die within 50 miles of their
original QTH.
Yeah, we travel the world, but we usually finish up where we begin. So
it's my understanding that you were a member of the PepperNet, the youngest member of the PepperNet.
Oh, by far. I was 11 or 12. The average age of the PepperNet guys were probably in their mid-70s through 80, and that net still meets now on the W2 ZQ repeater 0767 in West Trenton, New Jersey. So I'm 59, and so the PepperNet must be at least 60 or 70 years continuous operation.
So it's a weekly net, or
yeah. I don't remember what day it was, but maybe more than one day a week. Guys just get on and they chat and talk about what they did during the day. So it's a very casual network, but traditional, long key downs. You key down and you talk for 4 or 5 minutes. You make sure that you're not going to time out the repeater. I must have been pretty infuriating to get on there and for these guys, seasoned ham radio guys, to have to listen to a 12-year-old go on for 5 minutes about what I did in the backyard.
I can only imagine myself being 12 years old and doing something like that and having their attention for that long. What was your favorite operating mode then in those days? Because you went from technician to advanced. Did you still hang out on CW? Did you spend a lot of your time on 2 meters?
I had a crystal-controlled 2-meter radio, so I was pretty much locked to the W2ZQ repeater. Not long after buying the Heathkit system, I remember I had some experience in CB radio, so I still knew CB people. And another CB operator who I think may have gotten fined, and the father didn't want them on the radio anymore. Now, he had a FT101E that was converted to 11 meters. I bought that from him. So My next radio up was an FT101E, which replaced the Heathkit, and that gave me the ability to have VFOs and multiple bands. So that's when I would stay home sick from school. It was probably 10, 15, and 20 meter CW was probably my preferred mode as a young teenager. It was either voice on FM or CW. I was never very successful with single sideband with my setup, so CW is the way I went.
Did ham radio play a part in the choices that you made for your education and career?
I always did electronics from the very beginnings. We had radio projects. When I was in high school, I chose a vocational path. As a junior in high school, I was doing normal courses plus electronics at the local vocational school.
Did you build the proverbial color organ? You had 3 SCRs controlling, was it red, yellow, and green light bulbs, or Christmas lights, or something like that was connected to the speaker on your stereo, so that somehow I remember that in the early 70s that everyone was building, color organs, that light shows.
In my vocational school, we did a lot of basic stuff. We modeled diodes, we modeled transistors, we built simple low-pass filters, high-pass filters, and there was the math. So
you actually had an electronics guy teaching you electronics.
Oh yeah.
We just had the woodshop guy teaching us electronics.
No, this was a real. He was a retired engineer, and he was a little frustrated with us. But this is going back 40, 50 years. My memory's not completely clear on it, but we did blow up some components.
Of course.
It was good, and from there, unusual to go through vocational school and then into college, but. And maybe that was the next question was, I've always done electronics. I did radio. And then from there, the local college at that time was Trenton State College in New Jersey, which is now known as the College of New Jersey. The chairman of the electrical engineering department at the College of New Jersey is a pretty famous ham radio operator, K2UYH. Dr. Alan Katz was the chairman of the engineering department. So when I applied to enter the school and said I wanted to do electrical engineering, if he would have seen my application, he would have saw my call sign on it. So I think there's a good chance I was going to be accepted into that school.
Oh, that's pretty cool. And so what happened? You got your BSCE there?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. In 1984, I graduated, and that was great because we restarted the school ham radio station. With Alan's support, we put a satellite dish on the roof. We were evaluating some early TVRO, TV receive only equipment. So we were watching satellite television back in the early 80s, 80, 81, 82.
Right, C-band and KU band downlinks, right?
Just C-band only. C-band and unencrypted. Everything up on the satellite back then was unencrypted. Encryption started to come into the backyard dish business probably in 84, 85, 86. By then I was a professional.
And what did you do professionally?
My first job out of college was for RCA American Communications, which was a satellite company not far from home. There probably weren't many kids who came out of college with basically at 20 years old, I already had 10 years of electrical engineering experience between ham radio in college and satellite experience because I had worked with the satellite dish. It's pretty surprising to the RCA guys that I had that kind of experience, and they put me right on the road. At 24 years old, I was traveling the U.S. Building large satellite stations, satellite earth stations on government bases, military bases. It was fun.
Oh, it sounds great. Well, I guess we're the same generation. It seems like it was common for us to take a vacation from amateur radio. It seems that you took a vacation from amateur radio. How did that happen, and how long did that last?
I think it's called getting married. My wife knew I had a ham radio license. I would bore her at times by making QSOs, HF QSOs or CW or whatever. What she was familiar with was, if you guys remember college, you needed pass keys and stuff to get into buildings. Even back then there was, security. So rather than my trying to get through the front desk and signing in, I would call my wife. Let's say we were going to go on a date before we got married in college. I would use the W2ZQ repeater and phone patch to call my wife up at her dorm room and say, I'm down in the parking lot. Come on down. Let's go. And needed to prep my wife not to say anything that she shouldn't say on the radio. So she would recognize when we were on the repeater because of the quality of the voice and oh, I must be on the radio. I'm coming. So that was, we used a 2-meter phone patch back before we got married.
Right, for coordinating a dating activity.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that was a generational thing. I think I did the same thing. Because we had, as I recall, our auto patches on the repeaters were better than the mobile phone services that were available pre-cellular.
Oh, sure. And this shows how strange we were, thinking that calling your girlfriend on a phone patch would impress her. So.
Well, it impressed us. And that was all that was important, I think.
Right, exactly.
So you took a vacation from amateur radio. You ended up marrying the girl and raising a family?
I did. I'm still married to the girl that I met in 1980 at college, freshman year of college. I had the 2-meter radio and maybe 70 centimeter radio. I may have upgraded to a dual band radio in the car. I think at one time Radio Shack made a really cute 30 or 40 watt 10-meter radio. I may have had that in my car for a little while, but by 1986, 1987, we were close to having children and building a house, bought a house and had to rebuild it. So I think the radios were sold to buy plaster or drywall screws or whatever. So, and then we had children. So there really wasn't any ham radio from maybe 1986, 1987, all the way to 2015. Although there's one other thing I wanted to point out, ham radio and how it can be useful, is when I was coming out of the College of New Jersey, I sent out a lot of resumes and didn't get a lot of response. Maybe my resume wasn't very good, but there was a W2ZQ, there's going to be a meeting, and I was going to go to the meeting. I told my mom, I said, I'm going to go to the meeting, and she said, well, just bring a resume. I'm like, they don't want to see my resume. I'm imagining myself, handing it. And I did. I put a resume in my pocket. I mentioned I was looking for a job, and the way ham radio people are. Hey, wait a minute! This guy is ham needs a job. Anyone here hiring? And one ham said, "Oh yeah, our company's looking for people all the time. Give me a resume." That was on a Saturday, like a Saturday meeting, and on Monday, I got a phone call from RCA Americom. I interviewed on Wednesday, and had a job offer on Friday. So, and my entire career has been in commercial satellite communication. So you have to credit ham radio for that. I don't know if I would have gotten that job without my mom telling me to bring a resume, and I just happened to hand it to the right person. So what great fraternity ham radio is. And the friends that you make in your teens and your early 20s are friends that you still have in your 60s, 70s, and 80s. It's pretty awesome.
Now you've raised 3 boys, as you were telling me, and all 3 of them are out now.
The oldest one's living in Chicago. He has degrees in computer science and economics, the Franklin Marshall College. And the middle one, more traditional engineering. He has a degree in electrical and computer engineering from Lafayette College. And then the youngest one, kind of following the footsteps of the oldest, he is also at Franklin Marshall doing computer science. So all 3 kids are in engineering, either computer science or electrical engineering.
But they never got exposure to amateur radio until now.
Well, they got their experience beginning in, let's say, 2015.
With your return.
With what I'm doing with starting with amateur satellites and then moon bounce. And they're not fans. I mean, they're curious when they see a 16-foot dish pop up in the backyard. But they're more into the gaming and the online stuff, which it's hard for us to understand what they're doing. But what they're doing online with gaming and chatting with one another is not that different than what I did in the 70s on CB radio. We just used radios to chat with one another. So I can't criticize them for not being out or not meeting people or whatever. They're online and they have their online friends. It's not that different from what we do on ham radio.
They also can't imagine a time when there weren't cellular telephones of some kind.
No.
It's a different world.
Exactly. What we did in the 70s, the idea of using Morse code to talk to someone in Europe was amazing. Back then, a phone call to Europe could cost $1 a minute. So kids now, there's distance and sensitivity. They just know they're going to get on the phone and they're going to send video conferencing. My kids video chat wherever they are, college, Chicago, effortlessly at no cost. So what we do in ham radio, it's not really about the communications anymore. It's more about how can you communicate in the most difficult way.
Well, it's like being a hunter, don't you think, Paul? I mean, we could go down to the local grocery store and shoot that steak, in the plastic wrap, or we could go out into the wild.
It absolutely is about the hunt.
About the hunt.
And sometimes ham radio is a lot like fishing. You could sit there for hours with your line in the water, hoping to find it, that DXQ. So I this summer, I spent my first summer on 6 meters, and I just wanted to experience what 6 meter and E-skip was like. And this is not a good season. It's not a good E-skip season. But the idea of I'm doing digital modes is watching your waterfall and seeing signals pop up and disappear, and you get a good feel for what's happening in the atmosphere with propagation. It's very much like fishing. So and that might be the satisfaction, trying to hook the big one.
There's a certain amount of zen to it, perhaps. But it's the same thing as sitting beside a quiet brook with your line in the water, hoping that a fish will bite, and if it doesn't, but it's still the experience, right?
And you can almost imagine your wife calling you while that's happening, right?
Right. The noise sometimes from the radio, you somehow hear noises that aren't really there, but you think they're there.
Ham radio guys can hear Morse code in everything. You're driving your car and there's a squeak. Your car is talking to you. Absolutely. That's a ham radio phenomenon.
So how did you get back? Well, what brought you back to ham radio?
I think I may have been selling some stuff on eBay in the basement to raise money for college tuition or something. Who knows? But I had recognized on eBay an FT847. That's the dual band full duplex radio, and I got a good price on that. I bought it. First thing was a little bit of HF, and then I had to check in on W2ZQ, right? So I used my FT847 to do that, made my first antennas, and then tried satellites. Since I had spent my first half of my career doing commercial satellites, I figured let's see if I could send a signal through amateur satellites. So my first experience was I got a nice phone call from one of the command and control ops for one of the satellites down in Washington, and he nicely told me how I was QRMing the SO50 satellite by transmitting to it and not being able to hear my signal coming back properly. So that was my first introduction to satellites, was don't QRM the FM satellites. And then with that under my belt and learned satellites, I guess I spent maybe the first 6 months or so working. I may have 300 or 400 QSOs through the FM satellites and then the linear satellites, the single sideband. So that started probably at Christmas time 2014 into 2015.
A lot of guys would buy an FT847 and use it as a QRP rig. Although it's 100 watts, isn't it, the 847?
100 on HF, I believe, and then 50 watts on 2 meters and 70 centimeters.
So you were drawn to the radio by its being duplex VHF, UHF more than the HF portion.
Exactly. It was the VHF side. And the idea of communicating with a satellite. I kind of missed the satellite heyday with the high altitude satellites. Those have all died. Most of the satellites now are LEOs. So rather than having a satellite pass, which lasts hours, one of these inclined orbits, the LEO satellites are only visible for 6, 7, 8 minutes at a time. So, but there's more of them. There's a large number of LEO low Earth orbit satellites that are out there, and they're a lot of fun. That's how I started, was satellites.
So I saw a picture of you standing on a pier with a handheld dual band Yagis and the 847. It seems to me that, because I think about this, that that would be fun for a while to stand outside with the antenna and point it as the satellites are going over for their 6 or 7 minute pass, and then you have to wait for another one, maybe pull out your smartphone and look at the satellite app and see when the next one's coming. But doesn't that get old after a while? And then what's next? The next idea that comes to your head in terms of what you could do?
In satellite, the first one that most people do is the FM satellites. But yeah, after a while, you work everyone within your region. AO7 and FO29, which are they're MEO satellites, a little bit higher. You can work into Europe. So that on satellites, that's the challenge a lot of times is to work grids or to work a satellite which is way out off on the horizon, and you try to make the maximum amount of distance. So as part of trying to work satellites that are low on the horizon, I saw a guy selling a small moonbound station, and I thought that, well, that would be great for working satellites way out on the horizon because I'll have a lot of gains. So I never thought that I would actually build a moonbound station. I was just going to buy this small moonbound station and take it apart and maybe just use one of the two antennas. But as I got into this, I'm like, well, wait a minute, I have enough stuff here to maybe try a moonbound contact. And so I did. That definitely started what I spend all my time on now.
So the contact you're referring to is the one that you made on May 13th, 2015 with I2FAK?
Yeah.
On 2-meter moonbounds with 200 watts and two 10-element 2-meter Yagis. I read that and I go, really? Because I've interviewed hams, that have 4 24-element 2-meter Yagis with 1.5-inch hard line out to a high gain preamps out there on the rig and 1,000 watts. And you're working 2-meter moonbounds with 200 watts and two 10-element Yagis. How is this even possible?
What's cool about moonbounds is, and what attracts people to it, is the unpredictability of ham radio, having to wait for a band opening. That's not an issue with moonbounds. It's known how far away the moon is, how much energy is going to be reflected back. All those are constants within some variation. There, the moon has oscillations, the distance of the moon. You could calculate on paper how much antenna you need, how much power you need in order to hear your own echoes. And if you can hear your own echoes, a station that's built like yours could also hear your signals. So that would be a symmetrical communications path. Moonbounce also lets a very small station work the moon when it's communicating with a very large station. That would be an asymmetrical path. So Franco I2FAK has a gigantic moonbound station, maybe I think it's 32 Yagis all combined together. So he's able to work really small stations because he can generate a tremendous amount of power to get into my small antenna, or he can hear very weak signals. So a 10-element Yagi and 100 watts on 2 meters can certainly work the moon if you're working one of the super stations. Now, if that's the limit of your Earth station, your moonbound station is a single Yagi and 100 watts, you're not going to be able to work a lot of stations because there's only a few super stations. So what happens is you start out with 1 Yagi and then you add a second and then you go to 4 and then you buy a kilowatt. And then when you do that, you can start working stations that are your own size, or you can start working stations that are even smaller than yours. So that's kind of the path on moonbounds, if I answered your question.
Yeah, no, you did. So what is the rig now? What are you running? Let's get that out of the way, because I'm interested in, if you look at your QRZ page, you kind of go through this historical list of pictures of how it's progressing. What's the rig now?
Just before I go there's one other component we should do, and that is, in the past 10 years or so, Dr. Joe Taylor, K1JT, has been developing with his team the Wsjt digital modes. And that's the other thing that's really been a game changer for moonbounce, is the JT65. The digital modes have allowed moonbounce communication at signal levels 10 or 15 or 20 dB weaker than CW. So 20 years ago, the CW was the dominant mode on moonbounce, and now the digital modes has made it possible for the antennas to be that much smaller and work that many more bands. That's really been the game changer for moonbounce. It's brought it into the realm. It's still exotic to do all this. You need to know what you're doing to be successful at moonbounce, but it doesn't require as much aluminum in the air. I would say by a factor of, you used to need a minimum of 4 long Yagis to do moon bounce. Now you can do it with 2 short Yagis or even a single Yagi. So JT65 has been a big help.
And when you say long Yagi, what do you mean?
Yeah, a pretty typical 2-meter moon bounce antenna would be like an M2 XP28. That would be 16 elements on a 32-foot boom. So that would be pretty typical. That's a medium station. 2 XP28s would be a medium station. I ran that. Small station would be 2 10-element Yagis on 16-foot booms.
So if you're running a 32-foot boom, then you've got to be at least 20 feet off the ground in order to keep that antenna from its end from hitting the ground or hitting somebody, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they're big.
They're big and they're up high.
If you go to my QRZ page, W2HRO, I have a short section of our own tower attached to a chimney. So I have 2 XP28s, which are chimney mounted. But there is a limit. I'm limited to about 50 degrees of elevation because the bottoms will hit the roof. But yeah, you need to do some planning.
So what is the rig now?
It depends on the band. The FT28 was sold. It's a good radio, but with digital modes, and anyone who's doing digital modes will know this, frequency stability is very important. And on 70 centimeters and even on 2 meters, the FT847 is not very stable, and so it drifts. And when it drifts, it makes digital communications difficult. So I traded the 847 for a TS2000. I actually have 2 TS2000Xs now, which are the 2 meter 432 1296 radios. That is probably the most popular radio used in moon bounce. There's a lot of TS2000s, and it's a 20-year-old radio, but it's still super popular. And that's what I use it as an exciter. I also have a TS590, which is an excellent receiver. My 2-meter station was a TS590 and a Kuhn transverter. The TS590, which sometimes is known as the poor man's Elecraft, poor man's K3. It's a super receiver, HF receiver, and then the Kuhn transverter is very good, and that got me high stability, low phase noise. It's a great performing system for 2 meters. And I was on 2 meters for about 3 years, and I accomplished everything that I wanted to do on a 2-meter moon bounce with 2 Yagis. I worked all states on 2 meters. I completed DXCC on 2 meters. I completed VUCC, I think, 300 some grids. So I pretty much all of the certificates that you can accumulate on 2 meters, plus with my size moonbound station, I ran out of people to talk to. All the stations that were active, I pretty much worked them. In moonbounce, we call that initials. So I think I finished somewhere around 750 initials on 2-meter moonbounce. That's 250 unique stations that I worked.
So then what's the next step, is to move up in frequency?
Different bands. The next after 2 meters, the most popular band for moonbounce is 1296. That's L band. I found a dish. And in the US, there are lots of backyard dishes which are no longer being used.
These are like the C-band 8-foot dishes, right?
10 foot's even better, 12
Right.
foot's even better. With dishes, the bigger the better. The U.S. is just blessed with all of these dishes, and people will give them to you for free. They just want them out of their yard. So I have 2 10-foot dishes that I got for free. Neighbors just said, take it. And I gave it a new life, and you take the C-band feed out, you put an L-band feed in for 1296, add a few hundred watts, a little bit of know-how, and 1296 moon bounce is really strong. Where 2-meter moon bounce is weak signal, 1296 with a 10-foot dish and a couple hundred watts of power, signals are audible. It's a lot of fun, and for the past 18 months or so, maybe 2 years, I've been doing 1296 and also 432 moon bounce. What's nice about a dish is different from a Yagi, obviously. Every Yagi needs to have elements which are cut for the band. A dish is frequency insensitive. You just change the feed. So the same 3-meter or 4-meter dish can be used for any band that you can put a feed in. I use my 4 meter dish for both 432 and 1296.
Now, your placement in your yard, I think, given the moon can be just about anywhere, right? There are times when you can't see the moon because of the house is in the way or trees are in the way.
Where the moon is very predictable. Before moon bounce, I never really paid attention to the moon. I knew if it was a full moon. I knew if it was a half moon, crescent moon. But I didn't really have a sense of where it was going to rise or where it was going to set or what its inclination was, how high above the equator, how low below the equator, how close to the Earth or how far away. This was something I think we've lost as humans. I mean, ship navigators and people and farmers and the American Indians and Native Americans all lived by the moon. And I think moon bounce guys and gals are much more in tune with that. You always know where the moon is, and you pretty much with your calculator, with your cell phone and your moon position calculator, you know the time of year, you know the time of month. It's a lot of fun to be in tune with where the moon is. But with that point, I'm lucky. Where you place your antenna on your property needs to be the optimum location to be able to see the moon when it's rising and then see the moon when it's at culmination, which means due south and as high in the sky as it'll be, and then also where the moon sets.
If you're in the northern hemisphere, right?
If you're in the northern hemisphere,
right.
And then if you're in the southern hemisphere, everything is opposite. Obviously, I'm in the northern hemisphere, and 90% or 95% of all the moon bounce guys are in the northern hemisphere.
Oh, interesting. So that means that it's on the south side of the house, if you can put it on the south side of the house. Do you think that 1296 moon bounce on a 10-foot dish or a 12-foot dish is still a great mode for people that are stuck in the city on a city lot?
Or smaller. The noise that you hear on HF, the noise on 6 meters, even noise on 2 meters and 432, 1296 is quiet for me where I am, and quiet. It's still a clear band. So a 6-foot dish or an 8-foot dish with the moon high in the sky is a rooftop station. I think there's a lot of opportunity for expanded use. 1296. The equipment is inexpensive now, relatively inexpensive. JT65 digital modes makes it easy to make QSOs. As far as activity, 1296 is the second most busy band. There's a lot of people on when the moon's high in the sky. When the moon is in declination below the equator and it's not high in the sky, it's hard for people to see. So there's less activity. If you want to be active every day, that's a challenge for moon bounce. Usually there are activity weekends, and when the moon is high in the sky, there are a lot of signals on it. But yeah, 1296 can certainly be done from in the city.
Oh, that's very cool. Do you think that, it's been a long time since I've lived in the States, but do you think that people that live in HOAs, do you think that backyard dishes are still okay?
Bolting something into the ground is always a challenge when you have a homeowners association. If anyone goes to my QRZ page, you'll see a picture of a collapsible dish that I was able to pick up. This is like the Cadillac of portable dishes.
Oh, the one that looks like an umbrella that's closed, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But that kind of thing can be, built in your basement. Parabola is pretty well understood, a feed. So the idea of making a 6 or 8 foot dish out of screen and fiberglass poles, that kind of thing, or even a Yagi, kind of the entry level 1296 station would be a Yagi on a 15-foot boom and 100 watts. That would be well enough to work, a couple hundred stations on 1296.
I had a guest probably 4 or 5 years ago now in Texas who had a huge attic that he put all of his moon bounce and satellite equipment in the attic. So his attic served as a radome. So that the neighborhood wasn't aware that he had this huge array up there because he had this absolutely enormous attic for his equipment. So I guess that's a possibility too.
It is, although anything that you try to run a signal through, an RF signal or receive a signal, is going to add some noise. So I would think it's probably possible as long as the roof isn't metal, but there's going to be a certain amount of noise pickup by a moon bounce system as you point the antenna towards anything other than the sky. that's the way I calibrate my dish positioning, is by pointing it at the sun. And I see a 10 or 12 dB C over N when I point my dish at the sun. So when I'm calibrating the rotor system, the position controller, I'll point at the sun. I know exactly where the sun is at a certain time of the day, and then I'll go back and take what it should be and put that into my controller. So the moonbound systems are very sensitive to our noise sources.
Now, are you running a hard line out to your dish for 1296?
I was lucky to be given some half-inch hard line. Even on 2 meters, I used hard line to reduce my transmit signal losses. I used half-inch hard line.
Even on 1296, you use half-inch?
Sure. At 1296, 50 feet of half-inch is about 1.5 dB of loss. So if I have a 100-watt amplifier, even with half-inch at a 100-watt amplifier, I'm going to lose 40 watts of power. Some moon bounce guys will mount their amplifiers at their dish in order to avoid the loss in the coax. We always mount our preamplifiers at the antenna for moon bounce. There's just no way to effectively do moon bounce with the preamplifier in the shack, with the exception of 6 meters.
Do you buy special preamps, or can you buy them on eBay?
There are a lot of suppliers. There are hams that, as a cottage industry, they build preamplifiers in their basement and they sell them. There are commercial amplifiers. I have 4 or 5 different preamplifiers, 3 or 4 for 2 meters. I've got 6 meter preamps, 1296, 432. I remember visiting with K2UIH, Dr. Katz, and he had a whole box of preamps in the basement. And I go, why do you have so many preamps? He goes, if you're in moon bounce long enough, you're going to have one box of preamps that are burned up and another box, new ones ready to go. He's right. You have a collection, and you're using high power to transmit, and you're using super low noise preamplifiers to receive. You have to maintain isolation between your transmit path and your receive path. If things go belly up and your sequencer fails or something, you're going to blow out a preamplifier. That's why you have another one in the basement ready to go.
I see. So this is not a full duplex conversation. You're not transmitting at the bottom of the band and receiving at the top of the band.
The moon is not it's a passive reflector and not active. So in commercial satellites, you transmit up in one band and you receive in another. The new there's the transponder over India.
The S-Hail, I think, right?
Exactly. I listened to those, and that's full duplex. I was on Wsjt, one of these Wsjt sites. I was listening to the QSOs on that, and geez, that's what a great capability for ham radio guys to work a geosynchronous satellite. That's a lot of fun.
I don't think you can get it from the East Coast, though, right?
You can't. The furthest east you can see that is the eastern tip of Brazil. That's the best you can do in the Western Hemisphere.
Oh, interesting. I was under the impression, at least what little I know about EME, is that these contacts are quick exchanges of information. You're 599 and my location is blah, 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 given the nature of moon bounce. However, I saw an article that says you'd like to rag chew on moon bounce. How is that even possible?
With JT65, it's dropped the signal to noise requirements. Rag chew is kind of a relative thing. In moon bounce, the way a lot of this is done is you set up a sched on a bulletin board, and then you work your QSO, and then you exchange some congratulations on the internet chat board for accomplishing a very difficult moon bounce contact. But JT65 and the signal to noise and the quality of the signal and the bigger dishes, it's very possible to exchange more than just signal reports across the moon. I think that's kind of the future for moon bounce. Recently on 1296, between my small station and a large station in Europe, we passed slow scan television signals and single sideband messages. So with the bigger antennas and higher power, those are possible. And then when you talk about JT65, and there's also FT8, I'm talking to a few folks on the Wsjt and development community. looking for ways to be able to do FT8 across the moon and moon bounce. There are some challenges because the moon is moving. It's a moving target, so it adds Doppler shift to the signals. But I think we've done RAG-chew via EME, and in the future, I think there's going to be more of that.
What's a freeform QRA64?
JT65 is a mode. QRA64 is an enhanced digital mode that allows QSOs at even lower signal level. And then freeform is just being able to send unstructured text. In many QSOs, you can take advantage of the fact that you know the pattern of the information being sent. That first it's going to be call signs, and then it's going to be grid square, and then it's going to be signal reports. So by knowing what's coming, decryption algorithms are able to, a priori, are able to better guess what the information is. But when it's freeform text, there is no guessing. It needs to be a clean decode. So usually when you're doing freeform text, the signal to noise ratios need to be higher. And so that the point of QRA64 is just a sensitive digital mode, and freeform, meaning the signal to noise needs to be high enough in order to not anticipate the messages, if that's clear.
It sounds to me if I wanted to get into moon bounce, it would be great to actually start maybe in VHF and kind of work my way up. That seems to me like that's where you learn the skills. What are the best moon bounce websites?
There are a couple of listservs. MoonNet is a listserv where people exchange information. It's just email. There's a club in Switzerland, HB9Q, Hotel Bravo 9, Quebec. They have a really good blogger and website that can provide details. HB9Q runs one of the largest moonbound stations, amateur moonbound stations in the world, and they can communicate with very small stations. So if you wanted to try moon bounce and all you had was, let's say, 100 watts and a 10 element beam, vertical or horizontal, doesn't matter. Even if you don't have elevation, you can pick a time where the moon is on your horizon. So the moon rises, your antenna points at it, and if you've got JT65, you can do a moon bounce QSO with one of the large stations in Europe. That would be a great way to start. Building a small satellite station is a great way. That's the way I started. You end up having a 2 meter Yagi and a 432 Yagi, and then I think there are a couple satellites that have an L-band mode. So there's a reason to have a 1296 uplink.
It's like a virus, right? It just gets worse and worse.
It does, and you need to. Then you have to learn balance between ham radio and personal life, because when the moon's up, one is when the moon's not up, you can't do moon bounce, obviously. So family planning.
You pull out your lunar calendar and you tell your family when you're available.
It's a challenge. You need to know when you're going to be, and you need to have someone to talk to too. So those are the two components in moon bounces. The moon has to be visible at your location. The moon has to be visible at the other location, and at the other DX location, they also have to be awake. So if the moon is visible at 3 a.m. in another location, they may or may not be up. So there's a lot of coordination involved, and the family needs to understand that I can't control when the moon comes up and when the moon goes down. I can't control when the space shuttle flies overhead, or when a Leo flies. So it's interesting. But I mean, after you get through the initial excitement of the first QSOs and the first contacts, and they are exciting when you do that. After you get through those, and then the hobby becomes refining, improving, working a very rare station on an island, because there was a DXpedition to an island off Nova Scotia, CY9C. And that was, I worked them on 2 meters. I worked them on 6 meters. You need to be available when they're there. So the family needs to understand.
Okay, so the question I was going to ask is, do you see at some point that you could automate your station so that you could set up these schedules and it moves the antenna around, and you could run it from your smartphone, or you could run a QSO while you're asleep in bed?
Since people have physical restrictions at their homes, there are quite a number of moon bounce operators who run their stations remotely. So the dish could be 10 or 15 miles away, and they've got a computer that controls the antenna controller and the equipment. The internet has really made that possible. You just need a cable modem at the remote location and a cable modem at your operating position, and you can run the station remotely. That's done all the time, and a lot of effort goes into remoting back things like transmitter power, making sure that you're, if there's a VSWR or SWR problem, that the transmitter reacts properly. Absolutely, that's a big part of the hobby. What's fun about ham radio, you can focus on building antennas, you can focus on building amplifiers, you can focus on SDR receivers or the computer that operates all this stuff, or your main interest could be creating the remote control capability. I think where I draw the line is QSO robots. I just wanted to bring this up. Recently, there's been some controversy with Wsjt on HF modes. There are folks that have written QSO robots, basically, where it just does digital mode QSOs one after another without even the operator being aware of the QSOs being accomplished. That's not really practical on moon bounce, but I think it's an interesting tool. It's like a beacon of sorts, but you shouldn't get QSO credit when you're talking to a robot. That should be a separate kind of pursuit. So that's just my position on robots for QSOs.
What do you think is the greatest challenge facing amateur radio now?
Population. I mean, we need to continue to make it fresh and make it interesting, make it challenging so that we can bring new people into the hobby. Actually, I was talking to Dr. Taylor, K1JT, and explaining to him that just the experiences that I've had in the past 4 years with moon bounce are things that would have benefited me in my early days of my career at RCA. So some of the things that I'm doing now with moon bounce, with low noise amplifiers and cabling and phase noise measurements, these are things that I didn't even do as a professional. So you start to see that the hobby is not only a hobby for us, but this is the why hams are licensed. It creates this pool of qualified professional operators and engineers. So I think it's important for the world that there continue to be hobbies that promote this skill set. We just need to make it interesting enough to keep bringing young blood in.
How might you make moon bounce and what you're doing interesting to young people? Is there a way to take them out there or bring them to the shack or make demonstrations?
I think cheaper, smaller, more. The idea of the digital modes has made it possible that the moonbound stations could be a lot smaller and a lot simpler.
As a starting point.
Demonstrations, clubs, I'd have to think about exactly the best way to promote that.
Do you think the maker movement or going to maker fairs with moon bounce?
Absolutely. I think 1296 moon bounce, all you would need in the U.S. would be a technician's license, right?
Right.
Because it's above HF. The power levels are not really that high. I mean, 100 watts and a 2-meter dish, with a stress dish, of fiberglass poles and screen would be enough to do. That's worldwide. Well, half of the worldwide communications, because with moon bounce you can't communicate with the whole world. You can only communicate with someone who can also see the moon. But geez, sometimes you think about with a minimal 1296 station running on DC power and a couple of laptops, which are battery powered, even if the internet went away and all the power on Earth went away, you'd still be able to have a very long, reliable QSO between 2 points on Earth. You wouldn't want to be the last two people on Earth, but if propagation went completely to zero, you'd still be able to do L-band moon bounce. It's pretty cool to think about.
Well, that is pretty cool to think about. Besides moon bounce, what excites you the most about what's happening in amateur radio now?
It is a loaded question. All the questions prior to this one have been easy when it's about things that I've already done.
SDRs, computers, the merging of all of this stuff together.
Absolutely. You said the maker movement, digital modes. I think the cost of a lot of this equipment is going very close to zero. Just as an example, I wish I was able to keep this conversation more structured. But just as an example, I mentioned that the TS590 was an excellent receiver. I have found, and someone challenged me to actually do this, is there's something called an Rtl Sdr.
Right.
This is this little DVB-T receiver.
Right.
I worked 6 meters the entire summer using the TS590 as my transmitter.
Right.
And the Rtl Sdr and an SDR console, which is free SDR software, I use that as my receive path. And it is a far better receiver than the TS590. With the filtering and noise, when you're doing digital modes, it's fabulous. I'm using a preamplifier, but I've been told by others that depending on your terrestrial noise profile, that the preamp may or may not help. But yeah, the SDR is amazing, and that may be a future path for development. Will be digital mode only transmitters that are able to generate WSGT, AFSK signals at much lower prices than it's just
right.
Not
You'll just
news.
take the output of your Raspberry Pi and upconvert it.
Exactly. So
Right.
I'm saying it's maybe not good news for the commercial transceiver manufacturers, but you know what? Not everyone. This is a small percentage of people who are going to be building Raspberry Pi
transceivers.
Yeah, transceiver. There's still, the part of ham radio where you get on the radio, you get on 20-meter sideband, and you have a scheduled QSO with your 4 friends, that are 500 miles apart. And that's a social part of ham radio that will always be there. So I don't think there's a threat to the commercial radios. But SDR certainly is an amazing tool to put in your toolkit to be able to do other things. I'm probably going to add the Rtl Sdr to my 1296 system as a spectrum analyzer so that I can see the entire band. I'd be able to see all of the signals that are on the band that I'm.
Yeah, that would be cool. What advice would you give to newer returning hams? Hams like you that came back 4 or 5 years ago.
Just do it. Just get on the radio. There's so much stuff on eBay. People who come back from 30 years ago. I still remember buying a call book to be able to figure out the addresses of people that I talked to, so I can mail them a QSL card. Now that you've got Log of the World, you can log your QSOs. For a while I maintained a paper log. Now my log is completely electronic and online. There's tons of equipment which is available on eBay and other websites. One kind of interesting secret in ham radio is that you say, I'm gonna buy a TS2000 and they want $1,000 for it. It's a 20-year-old radio. If you buy used equipment and you keep it in good condition, and technology doesn't change, you can probably sell it for what you paid for it or a few $100s less. So if you keep a good reputation in the community for not selling junk, and so the things that I buy, I never consider that, geez, I spent $500 on a radio, I'm never going to get that back again. I just consider it a loan that I put up $500 in earnest money. I'm now taking care of this radio for a year. I'm going to accomplish this goal that I want to accomplish is, do VUCC on 6 meters. And then when I'm done with that particular challenge, I'm going to return that piece of equipment to the community. Someone's going to give me my $500 back, and I'll buy or borrow something else from somebody else. And we just keep churning our equipment and our materials and continue to complete challenges.
Right. No, I think there's so much equipment that everyone has that it would be very easy, I think, for most people to go into a ham radio club and make a plea, and somebody will have that thing under their desk. Or I certainly do. There's
a local club called Pack Rats, and one of the things they do at their meeting is everyone that goes to the meeting brings in something from their shack that they haven't used in a year, and they put it on the table. And I mean, the meeting, you look at the table and hopefully you don't take the thing that you just put on the table, but there's something there that's useful for you. So that's one of my rules is if you look around the shack and there's something that actually has dust on it, that should probably be recycled back into the community and put it back into use. So it's another part of the community, which is really interesting is all these good friends, exchanging information, exchanging equipment, exchanging QSOs. It's just, it's awesome.
Paul, I want to thank you so much for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. This is real gas, and I can tell from your enthusiasm and excitement about moon bounce, it's infectious. There's a side of me that wants to go put that 12-foot dish out in the backyard. That'll cause the neighbors to wonder what's happening next door, but they're already used to what's happening next door. So with all of that, I want to thank you so much for joining me and wish you 73.
73. Nice to talk to you.
Until next time, this is Eric Forza at 1UG 73.
In AMSAT news this week from Bruce Page, KK5DO. With summer upon us, it's a great time to incorporate a vacation or weekend travel when operating from another grid or state. And whether your preference is high frequency or satellites or both, you can take a rig with you and play your favorite pastime while enjoying some new scenery. There are many hams that travel for work and take a satellite rig and antenna along with them. Several even have jobs aboard ships and operate from those rare water grids. If you're going to take a trip, be sure to let us know if you will be on the satellites. All you need to do is drop a quick email to Paul, ke0pbr@gmail.com. That's ke0pbr@gmail.com. And let him know when, where, and what satellites you plan on using. He'll post it on the amsat.org webpage. If you're not able to schedule exactly which satellites you'll be on, don't worry, though. Just give Paul your Twitter name and post on Twitter when you're going to be on. Also, you can earn the AMSAT Rover Award. Check amsat.org, click on Services, then the Rover Award to see all the qualifications there. Enjoy your trip and give out that new grid or state for someone.
It's time for this week's Propagation Forecast Report, brought to us each week by K7RA. Tad Cook up in Seattle, Washington, who reports that on July 7th, spaceweather.com reported a G1 class geomagnetic storm underway with possible increase to G2 class. They said it was caused by a co-rotating interaction region. The storm subsided, but then came back early on July 8th. Sunspot activity increased this week with average daily sunspot numbers going from 49.1 to 62.6, but oddly, average daily solar flux was down slightly from 105.3 to 103.5. Taking a longer view, solar activity is stronger than it was a year ago when average daily sunspot numbers were around 34.7 and the average solar flux was 86.9. So taking a look at the predicted solar flux for the next few days, it'll be 130 on July 9th through the 11th, then 120, 125, 110, and 108 on July 12th through the 15th, then 110, 100, 95, and 98 on July 16th through the 19th, and 95 on July 20th through the 21st. Taking a look at the predicted planetary A index, it'll be 5 on July 9th through the 12th, 10 on July 13th through the 14th, and then 15, 12, and 10 on July 14th through the 17th, and 8 on July 18th through the 21st.
A reminder to get on the air this weekend, July 9th and 10th, for the Aaiaru HF World Championship. You can have fun searching the Aaiaru Membership Society headquarters stations on 160, 80, 40, 20, 15, and 10 meters. That contest begins at 1200 UTC on Saturday, July 9th, and ends at 11:59 UTC on Sunday, July 10th. You can check out the rules and set a goal right now. Aaiaru President Tom Eland, VE6SH, will operate from contest station VE7UF as VE6SH/7. Look also for Vice President Oleg Garpestad, LA2RR, and Secretary Joel Harrison, W5ZN, operating from their home stations. You can see all the rules at the Aaiaru website. And in the radio contesting, of course, we just mentioned the Aaiaru HF World Championship. That's CW and phone for July 9th and 10th. Also for July 9th and 10th, the SKCC Weekend Summer Sprintathon. That's CW. July 10th, the QRP ARCI Summer Homebrew Sprint, CW there. July 11th, 4 States QRP Group, second Sunday, CW and phone. July 11th, the OK1CI Memorial, CW. On July 13th, the A1 Club, AWT, that's a CW there. And on July 13th, the 432 VHF UHF FT8 Activity Contest. And on July 13th, the RSGB 80-meter Club Championship, single sideband and phone. So upcoming state and section conventions you might want to know about. July 15th through the 17th, the Glacier Waterton Ham Fest hosting the ARRL Montana State Convention. That's in Essex, Montana. July 22nd through the 23rd, Ham Holiday 22 hosting the ARRL Oklahoma Section Convention in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. July 30th through the 31st, the ARRL West Virginia State Convention in Sutton, West Virginia. And on August 6th and 7th in Cedar Valley, it's the Cedar Valley ARC Tech Fest hosting the ARRL Iowa State Convention. That's in Central City, Iowa. And a special thanks to these clubs for airing the ARRL audio news in San Diego, California, San Diego Six Shooters, KG6 TDP, and in Los Angeles, California, the Tri-County Amateur Radio Association, K6AGF.
The Maritime Radio Historical Society says that in the early years of the 20th century, there was nothing more reassuring for a lonely radio officer on a storm-tossed ship than the response of a coastal station to their call. The last of these Morse messages was sent on July 12th of 1999. On that date, the founders of the Maritime Radio Historical Society established their organization with a specific goal of returning coastal station KPH to the air as a means to honor the men and women who made the profession of radio telegrapher one of honor and skill. On July 12th of 2022, the Maritime Radio Historical Society will hold its 23rd annual Night of Nights, commemorating the tradition of commercial Morse code once thought dead. Each July 12th since the year of 2000, transmitters are brought online for this special event from the original Marconi and RCA transmission site in Bolinas, California. KPH and KFS will be operating on the assigned commercial frequencies, while K6 KPH will be operating on several HF amateur radio bands. For operational times, frequencies, and QSL information, please check the Maritime Radio Historical Society webpage at radiomarine.org.
The 54th meeting of the International Amateur Radio Union Administrative Council was held in person at the Sea Hotel, Friedrichshafen, Germany, on Monday, June 20th, 2022, and Tuesday, June 21st, 2022. Much of the meeting was spent reviewing the work from the strategic planning working groups. After discussion, it was agreed that in order to improve the efficiency and timeliness of IARU decisions and actions, the goal of the planning sessions is to structure IARU as one single global organization. It was further agreed the working groups must complete their work in time for presentation of the design for change to 2023 IARU Region 1 Conference. A draft letter to member societies offering guidance on amateur satellites was approved. The Administrative Conference added the importance of member societies contacting satellite builders as early as possible to ensure a smooth IARU frequency coordination. The importance of updated pre-launch data, as well as public available operational information after launch, was stressed. All contact with the IARU frequency coordination team should go to satcoord@iaaru.org. A proposed letter requesting support from the European Space Agency was approved. The IARU satellite coordinator Hans Blondeel Timmerman was thanked for leading this initiative. The Administrative Council agreed on advice and guidance to member societies on footnotes to the international radio regulations as covered by the upcoming World Radio Conference 23 Agenda Item 8. There was emphasis not to seek changes to any footnotes relating to 50 MHz since these are from the recent WRC 19. The AC similarly agreed on supporting conference preparatory meeting text for WRC 23 Agenda Item 9.1b. In consultation with the AI 9.1b leads, a news release and preliminary presentation on this agenda item was approved and released. A review of the preliminary agenda items for World Radio Conference 27 was started and will be followed up by the officers. The status of the grant requests to Amateur Radio Digital Communications Group was reviewed and approved. After a presentation, the AC authorized support for United Nations Human Security for All project. A study of the issues relating to the international forwarding of QSLs between bureaus is ongoing. Succession planning was discussed with reference that the consultation process for the next round of elections for Aaiaru President and Vice President should start in the fall of this year. Members attending the meeting were Aaiaru President Tim Elam, VE6SH, G4HUA, Vice President Oleg Garpestad, LA2RR, Secretary Joel Harrison, W5ZN, Sylvain Azarian, F4GKR, President, and Mats Elsping, SM6EAN, Secretary, Aaiaru Region 1, Ramon Santoyo, XE1KK, President, Aaiaru Region 2, and Aaiaru Region 3 Chairman Ken Yamamoto, JA1CJP, and Director Yudi Hasby, YD1PRY. Also participating was Assistant Secretary David Sumner, K1ZZ.
According to the Wireless Institute of Australia News, Darren, VK6EK, has big hopes for Mylog Uploads, a weekend getaway for recreation and radio. It is the fruit of a discussion Darren had with Rob, VK6LD, president of the Southern Electronics Group, VK6SR in Western Australia, and it becomes reality on September 10th and 11th at the sports ground in Mylog. Darren said that with its dipole-friendly trees, as well as bathrooms and a shed facility, it is an ideal location for this first try at a radio camping event. More of a social outing than a field day, it will present an opportunity for socializing with like-minded hams and still present plenty of opportunity for radio. There may even be a little fox hunting. Darren plans to run an FT8 station on 20 meters during the day and 40 meters at night. There is a 70-centimeter repeater about 9 kilometers away from the grounds, and it will be connected to the club's All-Star node 42482. Darren said the informal event is expected to be an ideal warm-up for Perth Tech, a camper-friendly symposium being held in October at the Gidganoop Sport and Recreation Center. He said that if all goes well, Hampshire may return to the Mylog grounds next May when the weather is still a bit warmer and drier. The club will just need to schedule their time around the horse and pony clubs who also have their own equestrian versions of Field Day there.
So here's a story that'll quack you up. Ducks on the Air, the University of Oregon's amateur radio club, will operate a commemorative station to celebrate the 2022 World Athletics Championship. The men's and women's track and field competition will be held on July 15th through the 24th at Hayward Field on the University of Oregon campus and feature athletes from around the world. The event has been held for 18 years, except for 2021, when it was postponed due to the COVID epidemic. This is the first time the World Athletics Championship has ever been held on American soil, and more than 200,000 spectators are expected to attend. The Ducks on the Air Radio Club, using their call sign N7DUX, will be staffed by amateur radio operators from the state of Oregon using all band and all modes. Organizers hope to make thousands of QSOs during the 10-day run. The club is also celebrating 100 years of amateur radio at the University of Oregon.
And now, with his segment on tower climbing and antenna safety, here is Arizona's own Greg Stoddard, KF9MP.
According to my skydiving son, Daryl, N9SBH, during a 300-foot fall, a person can accelerate to speeds of between 90 to 120 miles per hour. That's 144 feet per second. This creates a sudden application of mechanical energy to the human skeleton upon impact with the ground or other solid object. This energy is sufficient to shatter bones, destroy vital internal organs, and cause severe trauma that would be nearly impossible to survive. Even a fall from a 50-foot tower, which would last less than 3/4 of 1 second, can inflict a deadly blow to the human body. The only protection from this type of injury is the proper use of climbing safety gear. Please keep in mind that rock climbing gear is not designed for use on towers, But with a common sense approach towards safety, this type of gear can be used on towers more safely than ordinary waist belt only type belts you've seen advertised. Last month I told you about the tragic death of a young man from southern Indiana after he fell from a phone company microwave tower in northern Indiana. This month another story, this time a happy ending. On May 27, 1997, a climber was replacing lamps on a commercial tower on top of a 3,000-foot mountain overlooking Victorville, California, when he slipped and was left hanging from the tower, held only by his safety gear. Luckily, the man had a working HT he used to summon help. He was brought safely to the ground within 3 hours. Stories like this serve to remind us all that our gear must be used properly to be effective. If you're going to climb, wear and use your belt or stay off the tower. That's the simple rule. No belt, no climb. I've timed myself. It took me 45 seconds to properly put my belt on. It takes me 5 to 10 minutes to climb to 150 feet in good weather. This 45 seconds is time well spent. So maybe you're not going to scale a 700-foot steel beauty, but the little TV tower next to your house. It's easy to underestimate the danger of a fall from a 40-foot tower, so let's make the whole discussion unnecessary. Wear your belt. Encourage all other hams to use their belts. Together we can make climbing-related deaths a part of radio history and not its future. We can also reduce the chance of climbing injuries related to minor things such as sore legs, backs, shoulders, and other parts of the body. A simple method for reducing injury for the infrequent climber is a simple warm-up exercise. One of my favorites is a short, brisk bicycle ride for a couple of blocks before climbing. This loosens up the leg and back muscles and improves mental alertness. But if a short bike ride is not in the cards for you, then consider a quick leg stretching exercise before the climb. You'll feel better afterwards the more you physically prepare ahead of time. To sum up, always use a belt, even if you're only climbing to 25 feet on your own TV tower. Stretch those legs before starting the climb to reduce painful muscles that night and the next day. And never climb alone, especially at night. Always climb with a babysitter. Even a sitter linked to you only by HT is better than climbing alone. Remember, tower work at any height can easily become deadly. Clear, sober minds must be in charge. Money spent on books, videos, and climbing gear is well worth the investment. This is Greg Stoddard, KF9MP, reporting for This Week in Amateur Radio.
This Week in Amateur Radio is holding open auditions for news anchors for the weekly national worldwide amateur radio news service. If you have a good radio voice and can reliably read provided news copy, we are looking for you. This, of course, is an all-volunteer position. An amateur radio license is not required. You must have a high-quality microphone, headset mics are not used, and be familiar with audio editing software to record and edit your finished news stories before uploading. If you would like to try out for a weekly or bi-weekly anchor position with North America's premier amateur radio news on air and podcast, please send an email to our producer, George, W2XBS. You can include a sample MP3 of yourself reading news copy sent as an attachment to W2XBS77@gmail.com. That's whiskey, the number 2, X-ray Bravo Sierra 77@gmail.com. Be sure and use Anchor Audition in the subject line. Please include your phone number and a good window of time for a callback to discuss your submission and our operating logistics to see if This Week in Amateur Radio is a good fit for you. We hope to hear from you soon.
And finally this week, researchers in Japan are working on the prototype of a transceiver that is able to receive power wirelessly at the same time it sends and receives data, according to a report in the IEEE Spectrum, the official publication of the IEEE. Scientists at the Tokyo Institute of Technology believe the 64-element millimeter wave band phased array transceiver could become the first of its kind that no longer is dependent on cables, plugs, or batteries. The IEEE Spectrum article said Atsushi Shirane delivered the research results in June at a symposium in Honolulu, Hawaii. He said that the transceiver, which has a 64-element phased array of antennas on its front side, is capable of short transmission distances and is able to receive power from a fixed direction. It also contains a circuit board on the back where 4 RF integrated circuit chips are wired into one of 4 quadrants containing the antennas. Shireen said the initial goal is for the transceiver to be used in 5G service. He told the magazine, "We aim to expand the technology as a batteryless 5G relay transceiver to extend the service area coverage of millimeter wave 5G communications." He went on to say that after DC power generation is increased, scientists hope to find a way for the transceiver to be used with battery-free devices tied to the Internet of Things.
Electron Bender's Amateur Radio Club in Tulsa, Oklahoma, airs This Week in Amateur Radio, every week on club-owned KOKTLP 90.9.
Many of the news and information items heard on this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio have been provided by the American Radio Relay League, the ARRL Audio News Service, and the ARRL Letter, the Southgate Amateur News Service, Steve Richards, G4 Hotel Papa Echo, and the Southgate Vibes News Service, AMSAT, the Radio Amateurs of Canada, the FCC, the Radio Society of Great Britain, and Ofcom, the South African Radio League, the International Amateur Radio Union, the Wireless Institute of Australia, and the Australian Communications and Media Authority, the New Zealand Association of Radio Transmitters, the Amateur Radio Newsline, the Rain Hamcast, Eric Guth, 4Z1UG and QSO Today, QRZ.com, the Tech Guy, Leo Laporte, the International Telecommunications Union, and various news sources on the Internet.
With special thanks to all our weekly news sources and to you, our listeners, that wraps up this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio. If you would like to write to us, you can find everything you need, including archive editions of the news service, at our website at twiar.net. And now, for all of us at This Week in Amateur Radio headquarters and all our news team around the world, this is Will Rogers, K5